Hi, I'm Danessa Knaupp, and I'm an executive coach and the author of Naked at Work, a leader's guide to fearless authenticity. And today on the show, we're talking about when and how you should get naked. And I don't mean on your next Zoom call.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Have you ever thought about showing up at work naked? What about considering how that might actually make you a better leader? Well, stay tuned because that's what we're going to examine today. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Remember, this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind, your heart, and your soul is craving, particularly right now. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people, including astronauts, neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, multi-Grammy award-winning entertainers, and some amazingly fascinating individuals that you may normally think, I don't think so, who will blow your mind. This is your opportunity to sink your teeth into Curiosity Bites. Simply go to dovbaron.com and you'll see right there how you can sign up for Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners over time for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As we record this in the fall of 2020, one of the greatest challenges facing leaders today is where to find their pants. You see, earlier this year, most of the business world went remote. And thanks to companies like Zoom, most of us stayed afloat because of that. Now, even though most of us haven't put pants on in a long time, maybe it's time as leaders that we get naked, not of our clothes, but potentially of the armor that we put on each day when we go to work, whether it's remotely or in person. The question is then, do you have the courage to get naked of your armor? And if you do, how would that possibly make you a better leader and in fact grow your business? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly where we're going on this episode. See, my guest on this episode is Danessa Knaupp. She is CEO of Avenue 8 Advisors. She is an executive coach. She's a best-selling author who is committed to shifting the global conversation on leadership. Now, here's something fabulous about Danessa. She also is a failure junkie. Yep. She talks about shame more often than most people would like. She has coached hundreds of executives across every major industry and has developed a reputation as a candid, compassionate, and courageous leader and leadership partner. Her clients have included Anthem, Ameriscope, Virgin, BMW, Capital One, Comcast, Glenworth, Hilton, KPMG, MasterCard, and so many more. She regularly addresses C-suite audiences on how to harness the power of being real, being authentic in the gritty way. And what I love about her, that means not #authentic. She does this by driving to measurable business results. She's recognized by Forbes and Entrepreneur. She is a fresh, positive voice in leadership and team effectiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the best-selling author of Leadership Manual, Naked at Work, Leadership Guide for Fearless Authenticity, Danessa Knaupp. So glad to have you here.
I am delighted to be here, Doug. Thank you for having me. It's going to be a terrific afternoon. I can tell already.
Me too. I'm excited. So, you and I, we're big leadership people. We're big followers of leadership. Yeah. And where I want to just start is to sort of get a bit nitty gritty here. In the diagnosis of when we're looking, you and I look at the world, we look at leadership. What do you honestly see as the state of leadership today, 2020, fall of 2020, as we record this? What's the state of leadership from your point of view? And I mean that not just politically, I mean that businessly, I mean it across the platform.
Well, it's important for our listeners to know I sit in the US, and so I'm witnessing some pretty clear examples of leadership or lack thereof now.
Yeah.
As I think the state of leadership in the world today is one where we have some bright stars, lots of people who want to do better, but think it's some kind of uncrackable code, and lots of people who confuse leading with directing, or leading with managing, or leading with making statements. And so, at the end, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say leadership really is about the leading part. You've got to influence people to follow you. And so in order to do that, we have to connect with other people. And I think sometimes that gets lost. So certainly we have great leaders, and all of us in this conversation can point to them, probably ones we've experienced personally, ones we're experiencing on an international stage now. But for most of us, we don't interact with great leaders every single day.
So if you summarized it, what is the state of leadership today generally?
Not great. Not great.
And I think it's an important, we want to be positive, and I want you to know that as you're listening or seeing this, we want to be positive, but positive does not mean Pollyanna. Positive means let's look at what's great, but it also means look at what's not working and how to make it better. As an example, and this is not to be political, but as an example, people need to understand that to be a patriot means to criticize your own country. It doesn't mean that you become a jingoist who is my country right or wrong, but you are willing to say, I love my country and I want to make it better. I love my company. I want to make it better. Yeah. If you're running a company and you never look at what's not working, that's a pretty great recipe for disaster at all kinds of levels. And I think that we've got to understand that that's what leadership is. It's the willingness to cheer people on, to be proud of them, to be proud of who we are and what we're doing. But at the same time, to go, where's the cracks before it becomes an earthquake?
Yeah. And the activist Shaun King in the US just about a month ago was having this very conversation. He was not a supporter of Joe Biden, who ultimately won the Democratic nomination in the US. And what he said was, it's now my responsibility as a member of this party to help this nominee make the strongest appeal possible. And that includes criticizing him where I disagree. That includes bringing up opportunities for it to be different. You think about it, that's at a macro scale. If we think about leadership at a scale that many of us have experienced, we don't look at our children and tell them all day, every day, how wonderful they are without correction.
Some people do.
Some people do.
And they don't have great kids.
Right. They
Those
reap
are the
that
same people who are
reward.
calling us and going, oh my God, my kids are so entitled.
Right. You reap that reward about 15, right?
Exactly.
But you think about, how do I, if we're doing this well, and we're all trying to, how do I deliver to the world a functioning adult? And that means that sometimes I'm going to reward the intent and reward the effort and tell you that the outcome wasn't right. And so as a leader and thinking about leadership, we want to think about what is really the current state. I talk about it in the book you mentioned, Dov, as putting a pin in the map.
Yes.
Like, you don't navigate anywhere by starting where you think you ought to be or where you would like to be. You know, your GPS does not ask where would you like to be and then where do you want to go from there. It asks, where are you? In fact,
Exactly.
It knows where you are. And so that's so critically important for all of us to understand, is if we want to make a change, we have to accurately put the pin in the map on where we are. And state of leadership today, not great.
Right. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, because I think it makes it very real for people. Now, one of the things that I like to always start the show with is this question, because, you know, we're in this age of influencers, whatever the heck that means. And one of the questions I like to ask the leaders I work with, like yourself, who are extraordinarily successful, very recognized, who is someone that we might not know, might not even consider, who's been a major influence on you and on your leadership? It might be somebody we know, but it might be somebody we've never even heard of.
So Layla Saad has been a major influence on my leadership. Layla is a British expat living in Qatar. And she wrote a book called Me and White Supremacy. And she previewed that book. Let's say this a different way. The book came out of a 28-day exercise she did on social media about 4 years ago. And it was an exercise I was watching and staying out of and sort of watching it play out. And on about day 14 of the exercise, the premise was, it was for white people to write about and reflect on how white supremacy has enhanced their life. And I thought, well, I'm good. Like, I know about that. So I'm going to watch that in the stream. Right. And on about day 14, she said, hey, internet, if you are watching this thinking you're good, that is your reliance on white privilege. That is you deciding you know better than a person of color asking you to do this.
Wow.
And it stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, yeah, it is. It's me totally devaluing your expert opinion. Mm-hmm. And assuming I know better. How much time have I spent learning about race compared to her lifetime? Oh, you know, a solid maybe 2 days, which is more than most people of my predilection probably. But still, I weighed that above. And the rules of the challenge were you had to finish on day 28. You had to catch up. So you had to do all the prompts and you couldn't start on day 14. And I thought, you know, I have done myself a disservice. And I went back to day 1 and wrote all the prompts. It was incredibly enlightening. It was an incredible exposure for me of my bias, my privilege, my prejudice, which I knew about, right? Sure. But not in the way I didn't see how I relied on that in my life. And Layla's following was huge in this. It was ahead of now its time. Many would argue much too late, and it developed into a book, and it is the single most recommended resource that I give clients trying to understand meaningfully the role of race, especially in the US. Layla is not from the US, but writes in a way that we can understand and connect with. And I think that systemic view has powerfully influenced my leadership. It reminded me at a time when I thought I was pretty aware of myself. It's my job to be self-aware. This is embarrassing to say this, Dov. It's my job to be self-aware and help other people be self-aware. It helped me understand, oh, there it is again. There's that layer or boundary beyond which I do not know myself. And I need to constantly be working.
So there's several things to unpack in there. First of all, I want to know, can we have that resource? Do you know where we can find out about her, or even that?
Sure. Layla, her name is Layla F. Saad, S-A-A-D. And the book is Me and White Supremacy, and it's available everywhere books are sold. It hit the New York Times bestseller list when it was published earlier this year.
S-A-A-D. A-D.
And
Okay.
she
Double A.
professionally uses her middle initial. It's an F
F.
as in Frank.
Right. Okay, we will find that. So first of all, one of the things I want to thank you for that is because it is I think it's one of the great challenges of leadership is the presumption, which is societally conditioned. It's not you as you listen to this, it's all of us. The presumption is I'm a leader, therefore I obviously know, or else I wouldn't have gotten to this position.
Right.
And the answer is yes, you are a leader. Yes, you do know. No, you don't know everything. And moreover, you certainly don't know everything about yourself. But Dove, I've taken all your trainings. I've taken Danessa's trainings. I've read this book and that book and I've blah, blah, blah. Wonderful. Do you think there's more to learn? No, actually, I don't. Then you're already dead in the water. That's the problem. And I love it when when it happens to me and I get someone who's like, wow. Because I always say to people like, oh, please breach my bias. I want to understand, pierce through it. I want to understand. And for you to share that here, I think is important because you are so recognized and so esteemed in the world of leadership. And yet you got, okay, I did myself a disservice. Go back to step one, walk through this and see it. And I wonder how often we thinking, not with race, but in anything, we're thinking,
Right.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I got my people engaged. I'm good.
Yeah.
I understand emotional intelligence. I'm good. Really? Okay.
Well, and the thing is, you can dive straight into this and assume you know nothing, and that's terrifying, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do know something. You got here, you were promoted. So it's striking that balance between what is new, what's sort of deliberately a little bit uncomfortable where you can learn, and what's paralyzing. I use the analogy all the time because I have teenagers in my house. You don't learn to drive on the freeway.
No.
You learn to drive in an empty parking lot, and then you gradually step yourself up. So the job of leadership, when we think about turning the lens on ourselves, is to keep thinking, well, where can I tune that up just a little bit? I was listening to Conflict Resolution, a book that I'm in the middle of for another go through because we're all in the middle of conflict. And I thought, let me just re-listen to this one. And it said that the first tenet of walking into a conflict is to be committed to staying in it to find joint resolution. And I immediately thought, driving in the car, oh, of course I do that. Yep, check. And then the very next sentence out of the narrator's mouth was, not the intent to make other people see what you think. And I thought, oh, turns out I'm doing that thing.
Yeah.
Right. Turns out I'm doing that. Okay, let me rewind a second. Okay, to go in finding joint accountability. And for me, it was a conversation I had with my husband that we had tabled and we were coming back to. And I thought, you know what, I should approach this as we're going to find what works for both of us, not let me convince you. And I thought, even in that moment, but we really have to be open to it. And when we feel safe, we feel really open to this stuff. But sometimes if we feel threatened or there's a lot going on or we're under a lot of pressure, it's hard to feel safe stepping into that new place.
You're absolutely right. And as you said, I think that safety is a huge issue. And a good deal of that safety is emotional safety that we have to set up within ourselves. And a lot of it is safety through certainty and predictability. And I think that that's pretty dangerous. And you and I talked last time we had a conversation about uncertainty versus unsafe. You gave us an example when we were talking about what you called the McDonaldization of America. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think particularly at this time, people really need to understand that.
Yeah. So first, the McDonaldization of America is not mine. I wish it were. It's been out 20 or 25 years, and it was a sociology book I studied in school. So it's probably still Googleable. But the idea is that when we eliminate uncertainty, we feel safer. And that's why things like your favorite Starbucks order can be ordered from the app, whether you're in Timbuktu or in your neighborhood store. I actually don't know if there are Starbucks in Timbuktu. Yeah. But as we think about that, we get this idea of safety. But safety isn't about certainty. And I think we've all seen that in the pandemic. We've seen that as we've seen, explosions in Lebanon. We've seen that as we've looked at things. Things can feel very predictable and suddenly change. Mm-hmm. And so believing that to be true, you can use that to your advantage. You can say, hey, this feels new and different. And I'm naturally uncomfortable when things are different. Sure. But I'm not unsafe. Mm-hmm. So the example, I use a physical example if you want to play, Dove, with clients. And sure. Your listeners can play too, unless you're driving, just play later. But I use an example with my clients where I get them to cross their arms. So if we cross our arms just in front of us, that feels very comfortable. Now look down and see which arm is on top and swap it. Put the other arm on top.
Nope, didn't do it. There you go. I went the wrong way.
It's a great example of this is very uncomfortable. And those of you listening are sort of like, when is she going to say drop arms? And then I can go back to this.
Right.
It's uncomfortable. We don't like it. It's not unsafe.
No.
It makes no difference. It's just a habit. We can drop our arms now. But as we think about it, it's a great example of there are lots of things that are uncomfortable, that are uncertain, and we don't like them just because they're uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean they're unsafe. And too often we equate the two. And so thinking about whether you're in a new neighborhood late at night, or whether you're lost in a car, or whether your spouse says that they want to talk about the boundaries of how you argue, those are all things that are new and uncomfortable, but not necessarily unsafe. And if we can divorce those two, it can help us really access our best selves and grow in times of uncertainty.
That's a great example, because it immediately pushes us out of the amygdala, out of that fear response that we have around things that are uncertain. Because as you said, the equation is certain, safe, and certain is not safe. Certain is familiar. Familiar coming from the Latin familias, meaning family. It's just what you got used to. Normal isn't healthy. Normal is just whatever the hell you got used to. You're used to dysfunction. That's normal. And therefore you think it's healthy, but it's not. And so by challenging yourself to step into the different, and then you embrace the safety of being different. I mean, that's what SEAL training is. That's what all of those things are. It's like, you think you're going to die, don't you? Yeah, you're not, but you're going to have to find that out. You have to overrule that part of your body that goes, oh my God, I'm going to die. No, you're not.
Yeah. I prefer to experience that with the arm crossing rather than the SEAL training. But yes.
Everyone to their own.
Yeah, but that's exactly it, right? Is we think about and sometimes folks, when I'm working with them as clients, think that they're supposed to, now that they cognitively understand this, because just like your listeners, and we're really smart people, right? People who listen to this podcast, who work with executive coaches, are really smart people. So they think that because they cognitively understand it, it should no longer be uncomfortable. That is also not true. You can cognitively sit there and say, wow, this is really uncomfortable for me. You can't will yourself to make it comfortable. You can just talk your way through it. I have a client at a Fortune 10 company who is a delightful, bright, really engaging leader. And he still texts me. He's not in active coaching anymore, but remind me, uncertain isn't unsafe. And I'll text it back. And then he, it doesn't get any particularly feeling more settled, but it does get easier. It's a practiced behavior.
Yeah, it's a muscle. You got to train it, and it's a muscle that was very strong when you were very young, and is atrophied as you've gotten older. Unlike other muscles, it's the other way around. It was very strong when you were young. It's just how you operated to get through the world, and then things got more and more familiar, and you started to go, oh, cut that out. And that's all part of how we work. And I love that you're bringing that to people to do that, because one of the things that you talk about in your book, and you and I talked about last time, was grit. And I think that grit is a very important conversation, because I was having a conversation with a couple of SEALs actually, and they're saying how they hate this idea of grit, because grit is, everybody's got grit until they don't. And you talk about it in a different way, and I want to sort of go to where you go with it, because I think it's an important thing for us to understand.
So grit to me became interesting because it is one of the key underlying factors for executive presence. And I would say that most people have grit. So I would differ from your SEAL friends.
Right.
It's a question of whether or not they believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
So your internal voice tells you something, you understand it. It's a question of whether or not you're going to speak up and say something.
Mm-hmm.
And that moment is so terrifying for many people. It's so overwhelming that they don't do it. But what we know is in demonstration of grit, in standing up for yourself, speaking truth to power. And this is all appropriately, by the way, you're not putting the war paint on and waving a torch. But this is thinking about how do you speak truth at work, speak your truth, advocate for yourself and your team. That grit will be of service to you. And so leaning into that is critically important. And really understanding that is critically important. I think about Chanel Miller. Chanel Miller is an artist in the US, but she was first known as the US's Stanford rape case victim.
Mm-hmm.
So several years ago, there was a Stanford rape case. It was a very big case.
Yeah.
And the victim's statement was nearly 7,000 words long. And it was a very eloquent statement. And it was published, I believe it was published in its entirety by the New York Times, but I'm not sure that's where I read it. And that statement turned into a book. The victim of this crime was Chanel Miller, Know My Name. Know My Name is the name of her book. So I think about that as a beautiful example of how brave it was to stand forward, how brave it was to hold the space and the time in that, to tell her part of that, and how that has brought attention to what is a very talented person, right? So it hasn't made her career. She's not building a career on this tragedy.
No.
Rather, her willingness to stand in that place has brought her to an international stage. And so many of us don't think that. We think we don't want to take up space, or we don't want to say that thing, or what might people think? The truth is, when you are led by principle, when you are moving forward really authentically, and again, we're not talking, filter authentic, we're talking actual authentic, it has a tremendous value for you and your team.
But, and I agree with you, but the question would become, I'm certain, but how do I get that grit? Because I know my boss is a dick, and I need to speak up for myself, or for even for my coworkers. I know my, the person who runs something, who has some level of power or authority over me. Yeah. Maybe it's the head of the union. Maybe it's the CMO, or whatever it is, or the CEO, or maybe it's my mother. How do you? That the question is going to become, where do I find that quote grit when I know, I'm principled in knowing that I'm absolutely need to do this, but my legs turn to mush and my mouth doesn't work. How do I get that?
So one of the ways I ask leaders to think about that, and there's lots of ways to get it. That's good news, right? One of the ways is to think about, when you shy away from that, who is that in service to? So when you shy away from that, it is in service to the discomfort. It's not actually in service to you. It doesn't fix the problem. It's not actually in service to the other person.
No.
Because they don't know. So the only thing shying away from a difficult conversation does is it serves the discomfort. And so if you can think about it as, how do I serve this person by giving them this information? How do I serve myself and my team by bringing this to light? You can often draw courage there.
Yeah, I think that, I did a piece years ago, and when I talked about internal and external courage, I talked about conscious and unconscious courage. The person runs into the burning building and we say, oh, you're so courageous. And the person will always say, I wasn't courageous. there was a kid in there. I heard a scream and I had to go.
Yeah.
Because it's unconscious. There's no thought of it. It needs to be done, and you go without doing that. The most difficult courage is conscious courage, when you know, oh my God, I'm about to get, like, as if you stop that person before they're in and go, you know, you could die in there. You could be set on fire. Your legs will be burnt. You know, they go, whoa, okay, I'm out.
And they had to sign disclaimers. Yeah, nope.
Not happening. So that's the distinction. And one of the things that I do around grit, and I want to hit, because it seems like this is pretty much aligned with what you're saying. My quote is, who will suffer, meaning externally, it's certainly going to be yourself, but who will suffer if I do not do this? Who will suffer if I do not step into this, if I do not claim this? And I think that, you know, AA has a saying that is, you've got to do it for yourself. And I say bullshit. And the reason I say bullshit is because you got drunk for yourself. You became an alcoholic for yourself, whatever it is. We're all addicts. I'm not criticizing or judging, right? We've all got our stuff, but we did that for ourselves. We want to feel better. We want to feel comfortable. Human beings want to feel better. But what stops us from doing that destructive thing is usually someone else, in that we love somebody enough to say, I can't do that anymore. And so I ask, who will suffer if you don't step into this? Who do you care about? Right. And so are we on the same plane?
I love that. Yes, I love that. I think that's critically important is, and I'm going to use and credit that to you, Dov, on the who will suffer if we don't, because that is the call to action. I think sometimes we exist in a magical place where if we do nothing, things change.
Good luck with that.
Right. And so often we're comparing apples to oranges, right? So I could go have this difficult conversation and it could be really uncomfortable and things could change, or I could do nothing and things could change. Nope. That's not an actual choice.
Right.
So thinking about accurately, this is what I could do, and that's really uncomfortable, or I could stay here, do nothing, and my team could continue to suffer. So by far, the most common time I encounter this is when leaders are dealing with a difficult person on their team.
Of course. Yeah.
And they're just sort of hopeful that they will go to some kind of spa and work it out, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't pay attention. And so they think that there's no harm in pausing. There's no harm in taking the time. Well, what happens when that person finally leaves? All they hear are horror stories from the team of how awful it was, how those people nearly left, how they were constrained in working for that. And then my client will say something like, I had no idea that was happening. You kind of did.
Yeah, and what's more is even if you didn't, then my only answer to that would be very simple, which is, well, then how have you facilitated an environment where people are not safe to come and tell you this is a problem?
Right.
So at every level, it's a leadership issue. It's not an employee issue. If an employee is a dick, it's a technical term for those of you not familiar.
It is. It'll be in the show notes.
Exactly. We'll give you the Wikipedia link later. It just simply means you've not set up a culture that makes it safe to say this is not working and here's why. But it's not about whining and complaining. It's about let's take action. And you said something right there that brings me right into something I really want to talk about, because in our previous conversation, you said something that I think is so poignant right now. You and I were just talking about change and people's resistance to it. But one of the things you put out in your words, you said it's too long before people notice the game has even changed. It's like they have to be beaten on the head with it to go, oh, it's different. I mean, I've been having a conversation for more than 6 months where people are going, well, when it gets back to normal, I'm going, it isn't going to ever be what it was. It's already changed. Even if they switched on the lights and everything goes back to, quote, normal, it won't be normal again. So people, they wait too long. And that was one of the things you were saying. Talk to us about that, and talk to us about maybe some clues in how to get ourselves past this dire need to stuff our head in sand.
Yeah. Well, and some of that is the comfort piece, but I think the way I think about it is we miss too many beginnings.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
This is a beginning. We don't know what it's a beginning to. We get to write this story. But if it was the beginning, how would you treat yourself? You'd think about, hey, I'm new at this. I'm going to experiment a little bit. I'm going to test and learn how things are. But instead, we miss the beginning and we keep trying to force this square peg into a round hole. Whereas folks around us who can adapt more quickly are thinking, oh, well, now it's a triangle. Okay, I know about that. And they can go on and learn. And so what I would say is, as you look around yourself, even day to day, in many places in our home offices still, think about what is not working for you. And how could you change that? Lavia Ajayi is a speaker and activist, and she has a huge career as a keynote speaker. She wrote a book called I'm Judging You, and the Do Better Manual. It's a terrific book, and she's a terrific speaker. Well, the speaking gig circuit has changed entirely, right? It's gone. And so she's now speaking from her laptop, and she shared recently how her routine has changed. And she said, I keep my makeup and my earrings, and she speaks in a fedora, and a fedora right here by my computer. And I thought, what a great example of adapting to the change. How many of us are still getting ready for work in a room that is not where our webcam is, right? If you're doing anything for work, you might as well do it in the room with the webcam, because that's where your work is.
Yeah.
It's much more convenient. Keep all your stuff around you there. It's a really small example of things have changed. How can you adapt? Another is, I talked to so many parents who at the beginning of this pandemic were worried about their children keeping up, and were worried about homeschooling, and would talk about it as though they were homeschooling.
Right.
And my response to them was, you're not homeschooling. That's like me being like, I'm going to just be a surgeon for a day. You're not a teacher. You're trying to keep people alive during a pandemic. They can't go to school. So try not to serve them pizza every meal. Try not to have them be on the screen for 18 hours. But the expectation that they complete the agenda for what was going to be learned in the 6th grade at your home while you're earning money is an unrealistic expectation. We got to let that shit go. We can't do it. And that's the recognition of a beginning, is this is a different thing. It's like all of us who thought we were going to, clean our house and lose 50 pounds in the pandemic. Nope, we're going to survive the pandemic. And too many of us haven't been able to do that, right? So thinking about, what is my current situation? What's important to me now? And what's the beginning of that, rather than I'm going to try to cram this old life in.
Yeah, I really love that. Thank you. This is a beginning. So let's talk about the book, the name of the book, and what it means. Naked at Work. Now,
Naked at Work.
It's not quite in the reference I was giving at the beginning.
It's not. Although, who knew? For those of you who are interested at all in the publishing world, books lock, 4 to 6 months before they're in hand. So this launched on March 24th this year, 11 days after the pandemic really hit in the US, after the state of emergency was declared. But it locked well before. I had no idea that people would not be wearing pants most of this year. So some may call it clairvoyant, just lucky. I don't know.
Exactly.
But the idea is, who would you be at work if you were 100% focused on being the best version of that, without being focused on anything else? And the image that I kept coming back to, this is my own story of authenticity, was this naked at work that's a little bit uncomfortable, but you don't have to worry about anything else. And so the draft title of this book, Dove, was Naked at Work. But whenever I talked to the publisher about it, I called it Unmasked, Unarmored. I called it A Leader's Guide to Fearless Authenticity, which in retrospect is an enormously long title. And then finally, I had this conversation with myself on a walk through my neighborhood in the fall, thinking, why am I not just going to call it what I call it?
Right.
What's in the way for me? And what was in the way is, would people read that on an airplane next to someone? I don't know. What if people thought that I was trying to sort of take away from a Me Too movement? And I thought, no, that's all in my head. It's really clear what this is.
Right.
And I decided to move forward there, but I had to kind of unpack and unlayer. But what it really means is, what if you stripped away all of the excess things you spend time on at work? Shame from the past, fear about the future, showing up in the way you think you should show up, not taking up too much space or being too much. What if you just stripped all that away and just did your job? What would it look like? How effective would it be?
Well, and the thing about the book is a manual. So it's not, here's the theory, here's what, it's a manual.
Right. I come from a family, Dove, where there are 3 children in my family. My brother is a music producer. My sister is an actress and a voiceover artist. And I, for years, was a banker. So
a banker.
Yeah. And just to be clear about the family I grew up in, I was the disappointment, right? Like, oh, she was the banker. But pragmatism
should be all right.
Yeah, exactly. Now I wrote a book. It's okay. It's a little creative. But so for me, pragmatism has always ruled. And so for this to be important, for me to think that an executive at a Fortune 100 company is going to spend, 3 hours reading this book on a plane, I wanted them to walk away with really substantive advice, with a manual on how to do this differently. No sort of theory, because then what do you do with that? You've wasted 3 hours of your life. No disrespect to theory. Theory is important, but part of this book actually proves the business case for it. So we go through the data in an approachable way of why this is more effective, because this is a lot of work. So unless you want to do it, we had to create that business case. It's not for you. It's not to hold hands and sing around a campfire. This is to improve your bottom line business results. And so that's really what got me to this pragmatic step-by-step place. And it was born of really the work I've done with clients, watching this play out over and over again.
So can you give us an example of something from the book that is pragmatic, that even people can even grasp now?
Sure. So one of the lessons in the book that's really important to me is to stop wasting time on shame.
I love that. Yeah, let's go.
So we have like code words for that in corporate America and globally. So things like, we're going to do a postmortem, or we're going to dive deeper in that, or we're going to, and what happens to people in that is they get stuck in the swirl of everything that went wrong. Companies get stuck in the swirl of what went wrong. I think about the racial reckoning happening in the US, and those companies that spent too long getting messages out, they missed it, right? But they were stuck in the swirl of, how do we say this? What do we do? I'm not sure. What do we say? We get stuck there and we worry we're going to make a mistake, and then we can't take any action. And so when I work with clients on the pragmatic piece of stop wasting your time on shame, is to think about, when you do a postmortem of anything, because we should, right? We should be adults who learn. Yep. Think about, what could I do differently? And then let it go. And anytime you notice that coming back on, I don't want to do this, or I'm going to be quiet, or I don't want them to think this, or I should think, there's no ROI on that investment. I get nothing back from investing in holding myself back. Certainly I can take the lesson forward, right? You can do it appropriately. But when I work with clients on that, they gain a huge amount of time. So I was working with an executive at a large chemical company, and she was talking about a mistake she made with a high performer, and she spent 40 minutes on what she thought she could have done differently. And I said, how about we just do it differently? What are we going to do now? Start here. What are we going to do now? There's no investment on what we should have done differently. Just let it go. You're human. It happened. Start again.
It's very interesting that you're saying this. As you know, before anything, I was a psychologist. And One of my favorite teachers was John Bradshaw, and he talked about the pain of shame and
Yeah.
how shame binds us. But he also talked about something wonderful that I love, which is called healthy shame. And people are like, healthy shame? I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I carry healthy shame. I don't carry unhealthy shame. Unhealthy shame is shame somebody else has for me that they think I should be. Healthy shame is where I'm so pissed off about something I've done and so upset, so feel like it was out of character that I make a decision that I will not do that again. That's a
Mhm.
healthy shame. That's a moving forward,
Yeah.
not a looking back constantly. It's like,
Yeah.
you know what? I did this. This was completely inappropriate or wrong or unhealthy or not functional. And I'm done with it. That's it. I'm done.
Right.
And people always say to me, "You're so disciplined." I'm like, no, it's not discipline. I don't see myself as a highly disciplined person. I see myself as a highly principled person around what matters and I hold as meaning my dragon fire, what's real to me. And I know when I step out of that, and that's not discipline, that's like I'm out of my truth. And that's it's not acceptable anymore. I will carry healthy shame about that, so that even if I get close to that nonsense, I'm smelling the poop.
Yeah.
No, not going there.
Smelling the poop. And I think, Dove, what I want to acknowledge is you were a psychologist. You've spent your life in leadership. You're highly accomplished there.
Thank you.
I have clients who, when we say stay close to your principle, and it's just the two of us in a room, they'll say, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't make you, if you're listening to Dove and I talk and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure how I do that, just listen to yourself. You will. You've just tuned it out, right? You've just ascribed to the place where you are, and you're not listening to the internal piece. So don't worry that you don't have it. If you're listening, you've got it. You just have to turn up the volume a little bit. And once you've turned up the volume and you start listening to that internal dialogue of what I believe and what I understand, and how do I bring that forward? Not in a dominating sort of this is mine and everybody follows, but sort of this is what I bring.
Yeah.
And I want to honor that by sharing it with you, and honor you by sharing my principles. That can really be powerful in relationships.
And there's another piece in there that I think is really important. So I fully agree with you in that we've got to, quote, turn up the volume, and which means you have to turn down the noise. And that's
Yeah.
often difficult for people.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I would say to anybody watching or listening right now, I am an executive advisor / coach. So is Danessa. And one of the things I know for certain is that no one, don't care who you are, no one is objective in their subjective reality. We all need a coach. We all need guidance. We all need somebody who can see our blind spot. Even your mirror doesn't show the blind spot. You still have to shoulder check. That's your psychology. There's things that you just don't see. And sometimes, yeah, you got to turn up the internal volume. You got to turn down the external noise. But sometimes you've been listening to the noise so long, you don't even know the difference. And that's often where people are stuck. And you actually have to sit down and, I can get there with somebody in less than an hour. I know you can. It's like, well, you're saying this. Really? Yeah, that's what you're saying. Do you recognize that? Oh my God, yes, that is what matters to me. Okay, good. That's it. What if you built everything on that? Oh, well, that's going to upset some folks. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's chapter 2 of your life, right?
Exactly. Now you're moving forward. So I think you brought up a really important point. We got to turn up our own internal voice. We got to turn down the external noise, and we've got to be willing as leaders, because it's what you brought up right at the beginning, as leaders to learn. And learning means you have to be willing to say, I don't know. And those are terrifying words for many of us. I don't know, and I need somebody who can see what I can't see. Yeah. That's why we come in. It's because I say to people, say, well, have you done any work in the pharmaceutical industry? And I go, no. And they go, well, I'm not sure if you'll understand. And I go, it's because I don't work in the pharmaceutical industry that I can help you. I don't have your bias. That's the advantage. And so I really appreciate you bringing that forward.
Yeah, it's so important to, it ties, Dove, to what we were saying at the beginning, that kind of pushing into your new areas, pushing into the space where you want to learn. Sometimes I have clients come sit in front of me and they say, I just feel kind of like I've Austin powered this. I've lost my mojo. But I can't tell you why. It might take us a session or two to get there, but that is all that voice speaking to you. That if you feel sort of a quiet discontent, it's there, and either you can unpack it with a coach. Journaling can help.
Absolutely.
There's lots of ways to unpack it, but connecting with that is critically important. And then it's about doing the next right thing, as the author Glennon Doyle would say. What's the next right thing?
But you just said something really important, which is to recognize first and foremost. You got to step back. You got to recognize, because that is the new beginning. Yeah. And so it brings you back to what you were saying earlier, which is that it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe.
Right.
It's uncomfortable because everything new is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And the analogy I give people all the time is, I want you to think about anything you're really good at. Yeah. You used to be shit at it. You used to be crap at it, but you were committed enough that you went from being crap at it to being magnificent at it. And people go, oh my God, you do that with such ease. And you probably don't even think about it anymore. Yeah. You can eat a sandwich, drink a cup of coffee, drive down the road and talk on your phone all at the same time. And you remember your first driving lesson, your back was soaking wet. And if you were driving a standard, you were kangarooing down the road trying to use the clutch. And now you can do all those things. So it's a really important point.
It's a hugely important point, Dove. And I challenge your listeners to think about, when was the last time they were shit at something? Mm-hmm. Because what we do is we allow ourselves to be shit at something until we're about mid-20s. And then there's some sort of unspoken, like, that now you have to be good at all of it. Right?
Not allowed anymore.
Yeah, all done with that.
Don't we? We even use it as language. Well, you're young, you make plenty of mistakes, you're young.
Right.
Which is actually, if you think about it, I never thought about it, but on the other side of it means I'm older, I'm not allowed to do that.
Right. It's just not true. And so think about, if you're uncomfortable making mistakes, well, one, it's uncomfortable to begin with, and two, you're really out of practice. It's been a long time since you were shitty at something. Sometimes when I work with clients who are having a hard time, I'll say, let's start something new. Go join a soccer team. If you've never played soccer, tell them you've never played, right? Go learn how to put together something, put together a difficult model, or start something different. I mean, an actual physical model. I don't mean an Excel model. But think about how to remind yourself what it's like to be shit at something. Remind yourself you can do it.
I love that. There's a wonderful quote by a Tai Chi master. And he says, you think that to be a master is to be able to do it as if you've done it 1,000 times. He said, a master does everything as if for the first time.
Oh, I love that.
Wonderful?
That gives me chills. Yeah.
Just like that childlike awe. Wow. Yeah. I get to do this. And, and we get so caught up in that egoic, oh my God, I don't want to look foolish, as opposed to the exploration which you're putting forward. We're getting close to the end of the show, and there are a couple of things I want to ask you about, because, a lot of this turning up naked, being fully present, being your most authentic self at work in the non-hashtag way, but in the gritty way. I think that people watching, listening to us might think that that's a destination. So I would love for you to share with us where and how you often will maybe still struggle with that, and when it comes up for you, and what do you do with it?
Yeah. Oh, this happens to me all the time. I mean, even in this conversation, Dove, where this is content I love, and you and I have talked before and had a great conversation, I noticed myself thinking, oh, well, I hope we do. Well, that just is how we are. It's human nature to feel uncomfortable or not sure about how we want to show up. And so grounding yourself in, for me, it's the thought of, I'm going to bring my best. And that is the extent of what I can do. And I'm confident that my best is good, right? I've done the work to make my best good.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is better or I make a mistake, that's how we live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we learn. There's that quote about failure, that I never fail. I either succeed or I learn.
Mm-hmm.
And people kind of roll their eyes, right? Failure is not helpful, but it's really true. Failure is helpful. It's quite painful though. And just reminding yourself that, well, now I'm going to know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to better understand that. And the next time I do this, I'll be better at it. May not be successful that time, but I think that piece is critically important, that we struggle with it all the time. I struggled with it publishing the book. I made some choices in the book that I was worried that maybe I should change. Even speaking, when I speak to audiences, every now and then I think, well, this is an audience of so-and-so. Should I show up this way? And you certainly don't want to show up in a way that totally distracts from your product, right? I use the example of, you wouldn't have a private equity banker with a face tattoo. That's distracting from his performance. It's distracting in the environment. But a private equity banker with his own choices and what he's wearing, okay. This is about knowing and understanding your authenticity, understanding the power it brings. And in that, just like we started, also understanding the real state of it. You may be in an environment that you can't wear crazy socks as a private equity banker.
Mm-hmm.
You know that, and you get to choose that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. You're not a victim of it.
Right.
People have asked me about jobs, and I always said, yeah, I'm a terrible employee. Why? I don't like their rules.
Yeah.
I'm not going to dress the way somebody else wants me to dress. I'm not going to take my earrings out. I've worn them since I was 15. I'm 63, coming on 63 years old. They're not coming out.
Yeah.
It's part of my brand. It's part of my look. I like them. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you want me to play by your rules, that ain't going to happen. But if you want me and you don't care about, that's fine. And that's just one example. But at the same time, you also have to say, well, do I want to be there?
Right.
And if I do, what are the rules of the game? Because sometimes you got to play by the rules of the game. But you got to get that. You're not a victim of it. You either choose to be in or you choose to be out. And I think that that's a really important thing. So that way you get to empower yourself in the process.
Yeah. And this is much harder for historically underrepresented groups.
Of course.
And so it is a really nuanced conversation there.
Exactly.
And still, though, I would say as I work with my Black and Indigenous people of color clients, still room for choice. Not as much room as their white counterparts, not as much room as their male counterparts for female employees, but still room for choice and room for power in your own life.
Yeah, and I think that the key is if you read, I'm trying to remember his name now. It's going on my head. A brain fart. Sorry. When he talks about living in Auschwitz as a child, it'll come to me in a minute.
Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel, thank you.
Yeah,
and talks about that it's a completely powerless situation.
Yeah.
But you have to make powerful choices in a powerless situation, and that might be to just show kindness or smile at somebody.
Yeah.
That in that moment, you have the power because you chose. So you can either be powerless or you can be powerful. And the extent of that is not defined by you, but is decided by you, which is an important distinction. I got to tell you, I have loved this conversation. It is a joy talking to you, a pure joy. But we're already out of time. So I want to ask you two quick things. One, I'm going to ask you in a moment to tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources. And before I do that, I want to ask you to share with our listeners, our viewers, one piece of practical guidance you can give them to have them really take what it is that you're talking about in your book and what it is that you work on, that they can put into practical action, preferably right away.
We haven't talked much about this one, but it's the cornerstone of a lot of this work, and it's simple to do, which is when you tell yourself a story, that's how that team is, that's how that person is, I can't do this, recognize it as such and tell a different one.
And if you can't tell a different story because you're so deeply ingrained, find somebody who can help you find a different story.
Exactly.
That is such great, solid, simple advice. We're all telling stories all day long. That's why human beings respond well to stories.
Yeah.
But we also respond terribly to stories because they keep us fixed in our bias. So I love that you're doing that, making us aware of that. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dove.
It has been a pleasure and honor. Please tell our guests, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, all your resources.
So if you'd like to work with me or a member of my team as a coach, you can go to avenue8advisors.com and you can learn lots about our coaches there and our programs and our executive. We don't have many programs that are formulaic. Rather, we work with folks individually. So you can go there. If you'd like to learn about me for speaking or to just because you're curious about the banker amongst the creatives, DanessaKnaupp.com. So it's DANESSA, and the last name is KNAUPP.com. And the book is Naked at Work, A Leader's Guide to Fearless Authenticity. And you can find it anywhere books are sold. It's often featured on Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble, anywhere you like. And your independent booksellers will have it as well.
Of course. And of course, we will make sure that all those links are published in the show notes, so you can certainly go look for them there. And again, I always encourage you to remind you that information is really worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. So it's really up to you to put this in action. Get the book. It's a manual. Read through it. Do the work. Danessa, this was a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your caring with us. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our LinkedIn or our Facebook groups. Simply look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. Because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or a leadership strategist, executive advisor for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can be naked at work. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.